Greetings, I'm Arlene Blum, the Executive Director of the Green Science Policy Institute, and I'm so very happy to welcome you to our Institute's first Science and Communication Strategy Workshop. The following short talks will provide you with inspirational examples and the communication skills so that your research can contribute to healthier products, people, and environment. Our Institute has had great success in changing government policy and business purchasing practice to reduce harm from toxic chemicals. Our Institute writes scientific papers with topics to support policy in the public interest. We communicate the results widely, and then we convene retreats to bring together business, government, scientists, and NGOs. And at our very first retreat, we asked the question, there are many chemicals in everyday products that we know are harmful. The research and regulation to reduce the use of these toxic substances can take many years, during which time we continue to be exposed and to be harmed. What can we do? We came up with the idea that there are 6 classes or families that contain a majority of the harmful chemicals in everyday products. I hope you have all gone to 6classes.org and taken a few minutes to learn about these chemicals and what you can do to protect yourself. I'm going to give you some examples of our work. It started with flame retardants. California had a flammability standard that was followed across all of the US and Canada that led to all the foam in furniture and in children's products being 5% by weight, a toxic flame retardant like a PBDE or a chlorinated tris. And that was meant to make the foam inside the furniture withstand a very small flame for 12 seconds. But the reality is that if you, for example, drop a candle on your couch, first the fabric burns, you have a large flame, and then the foam burns really fast, and it's actually more toxic because of the flame retardant. So this was a very bad standard. It led the flame retardants come out, they end up in people and the environment. The average child in the US has lost 4 or 5 IQ points because of the flame retardant PBDEs, and there has been no increase in fire safety. So this was a big problem. We thought we could solve it by changing the California standard, but unfortunately the flame retardant producers, calling themselves California for Fire Safety, spent a documented $23 million lobbying in Sacramento. Very frustrating. We could not seem to change the standard due to the companies. And then we started writing papers. And the first one where we looked at 100 baby products and discovered there were flame retardants in 80 of them, up to 13% by weight, chlorinated tris in a baby changing mat. But we not only wrote these papers, we really communicated them. We used them to educate. Our next paper was about flame retardants on couches, and we determined that virtually all the couches in North America and certainly all the couches in California, again, the foam contained these same flame retardants. Then we wrote a consensus statement that was published in Environmental Health Perspectives, the San Antonio statement, documenting a lot of science showing the harm of the chemicals, the lack of benefit of the standard, because the chemical producers kept claiming that the chemicals were just fine, just a few NGOs who didn't know any science. So we really documented the science. We got support from industry when the furniture industry, for example, learned about the harm from our scientific papers, from our consensus statement, they joined in. So eventually the home furniture, business furniture, trade associations, the foam association, fabric association, and the firefighters also who didn't like exposure to toxic combustion products, they all helped us. And realized we didn't need flame retardants in furniture. And the thing that made all the difference was a report by the Chicago Tribune, and the subtitle says it all, a deceptive campaign by industry brought toxic flame retardants into our homes and into our bodies, and the chemicals don't even work as promised. And after, with, as I said, support from scientists, firefighters, the community, and great communication through the Chicago Tribune, the governor of California was able to change the standard. So if you go to buy a couch now, there'll be a label like this one, and you'll see checked, contains no added flame retardant chemicals. And actually, there's now increased fire safety because the new standard stops the fire in the fabric, so it never reaches the flammable foam. So this was kind of our first example of writing papers and having impact. Our most recent examples are PFAS, the forever chemicals that many of you are working on. When we first learned about the problem in 2013, we started a scientist group that some of you participate in, and we've met once a month since 2013, and many of you have joined us. Others would be invited to if you're interested in PFAS. We share policy and science information from all over the world once a month on our calls. And in 2015, we published the Madrid Statement on highly fluorinated chemicals, calling on the international community to limit the production and use of the whole class of PFAS. And we publicized this. You can see National Geographic, Nick Kristof. Those of you who don't know it, there's a wonderful series by Sharon Lerner in The Intercept, the Teflon Toxic. And then the thing that made all the difference was a New York Times cover story. The lawyer who became DuPont's worst nightmare about Rob Bilott, the attorney who discovered the contamination in Ohio and West Virginia. This was the basis of the movie Dark Waters, which I recommend if you hadn't seen it. After this article is a great story, and I wrote the author, Nathaniel Rich, and I said, "You're such a great science writer. Do you want to do more writing? Join our newsletter list." And he said, "Well, actually, I wrote this because of the character of Rob Bilott. I'm not a science writer, but I'll share with you, I got such responses to this New York Times cover story." And so he shared with me several letters like this one from the New York Department of Health to Gina McCarthy, who was then the head administrator at EPA. And just based on reading the story in the New York Times, the New York Department of Health wrote the EPA demanding that they take action to make a health advisory level for PFOA, a maximum contaminant level, a lot of good things, which can say the impact of just a good science-based story on government. And after that, well, at the same time as that was happening in our group of scientists, Andy, who's here as part of our group, had shared with us high levels of PFAS in drinking water around the country. And he was very concerned. And in our science group, we decided to write a paper tracing back from communities with high levels of PFAS to the source. And Elsie Sunderland, who was in the group, said her student Cindy Hu could do the mapping. And she found that the sources were industrial sites, military training areas, airports, wastewater treatment plants, and was writing this paper. And just as she was finishing it, based in part, I think, on the New York Times article, the EPA did set a health level of 70 parts per trillion for PFAS in drinking water. And Cindy was able to calculate that 12 million Americans had levels above the health advisory level. And so she included that in this paper, which I think may have had more downloads than any other paper in the history of ES&T letters. Another example is a paper we wrote about fluorinated compounds in fast food packaging with in collaboration with Silent Spring and others. And we found, well, originally I went around Berkeley collecting samples from organic restaurants and cooperatives in Berkeley, and discovered PFAS in a lot of the wrappers, and told the stores, which was nice, they gave us free pizzas and thanked us, and stopped using PFAS in their wrapping. So then we decided to check out fast food, and got 400 samples, and again, about 40% contained PFAS. So we published the paper, we communicated it. We talked to Senator Blumenthal, and he wrote to the various manufacturers of fast food, questioning that they were using these chemicals in their food wrappers. This was 2017. We subsequently heard from some people who worked with these major companies like McDonald's that as soon as this happened, as soon as our paper was published, they knew they were going to have to get PFAS out of their food packaging. They started looking for alternatives that were effective and not too expensive, and started removing them right away. And just maybe a month ago, McDonald's announced that they had PFAS out of all their packaging worldwide. But apparently they'd gotten most of it out starting pretty soon after our paper came out. Another example is carpeting. Used to be, carpeting was the major source of exposure for children. And the carpet industry had been using C8, the long chain PFAS. They switched to C6, the short chain PFAS, and thought they'd solved the problem. However, we believe, and we wrote a paper saying that PFAS should be managed as a class, that going from the long chain to the short chain is not an improvement due to the extreme persistence and potential toxicity of all PFAS, and that we don't have time to study them all. And we shared that message with the carpet industry, actually before this paper was published, but we very effectively. And after our workshop, they came from Dalton, Georgia to Berkeley and learned all this good science. And the leaders in the carpet industry decided several years ago that they would phase all PFAS out of all carpets by January 1st of 2020. And they did. And we knew that when Home Depot announced they weren't going to be selling carpets and rugs containing any PFAS. And that was because the companies had decided based on the good science. So these are, to me, it was amazing that all these things happened. It really made me realize the power of taking your science, focusing on communicating it well to the right people, manufacturers, retailers, government. And just to review the papers that we've been talking about, they have had a lot of impact. The baby product paper with flame retardants has had nearly 25,000 downloads, the couches, 7,000. That one about highly fluorinated chemicals in drinking water, tracing back to the sources, has had 51,000 downloads, the fast food, 30,000, and our most recent one, just from a year ago, managing PFAS as a class, has 32,000 downloads. So these are really unusual numbers in the history. And I hadn't noticed this, someone pointed out, but ES&T Letters, 4 of the 20 highest impact papers were our papers. And I don't think, I mean, our science is good, but I don't think it's because our science is so extraordinary. I think it's because we have really focused on communicating it and picking topics. So let me just go over our strategy, and you'll hear more about this from Rebecca in more detail, but just to kind of get it started, we collaborated with expert authors from multiple institutions. We select research topics to support policy in the public interest. We always publish open access, which means we have to pay for it. The most critical thing is we select a publication date for maximum impact. There's a tendency for scientists just to be so happy that their paper is online, it goes online right away. With the fast food paper, it could have gone online in early December, but due to the holidays, the Women's March, a lot of things, it didn't go online until February 1st, and it had so much impact. I think if it had gone online sooner, it might not have. We try to compose a press release in accessible language with a hook, and you'll be learning more about that next time. We query journalists in advance and then share the paper. We educate the journalists. We try to establish relationships. We hope it's not a big news day, and then we utilize the paper to affect change. So once again, here's our model, and I think we have a couple minutes for questions.